Welcome everyone to this Career Pathways workshop on succeeding in the home stretch. This is one of my favorite Career Pathways workshops, primarily because I feel like this is a way to engage graduate students who sometimes really struggle because you're no longer in the classroom and you're off doing your own dissertation research or thesis research on your own, or studying and preparing for a comprehensive exam, and you don't have a professor looking over your shoulder and saying things are due this day and this day and this day. And also sometimes the isolation of going out and doing field work or doing your own research without being able to necessarily connect with members of your cohort or your classmates. So I know this is a very difficult time for a lot of the graduate students. So I wanted to make sure that we offered good advice and strategies and insight from people who have successfully made it through that home stretch. So I do want to thank Sam, who recently defended for her MFA. She made it through the home stretch. And Dr. Robin Dunbar, who also last year made it through the home stretch and defended her dissertation research. So they have very relevant experience and insights to share with you. And I also have faculty member here, and I'll also try and bring more of that faculty mentor perspective as well. So before we get started, I'm going to just quickly ask our panelists to um, introduce themselves, and then we'll get started with some of the prepared questions that I have, and we will have Q&A at. So I'm Wi Youssef. I am a professor in the School of Public Service. I primarily teach in the PhD program in Public Administration and Policy. And I see often how some of my students just kind of fall off the wagon periodically when they're out there doing their dissertation and thesis research. So that's part of the reason why I feel like this is a really important workshop for our graduate students. So if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Sam, and Robin will finish with the introductions.
Definitely. Good morning. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you very much for inviting. My name is Gülşah Kemer. I am an associate professor of counseling in the School of Education and Professional Studies. I have been primarily teaching at the doctoral level too. I usually chair dissertations every year, and I will definitely share some of my experiences, what I observed, and I'll be looking forward to your questions as well. Thank you for having me this morning.
Hey, good morning. Can everyone hear me? Okay, good. My name's Samantha New. You can call me Sam. I recently, as we mentioned, recently successfully defended my thesis. So I'm in my third year and final semester in the graduate program, creative writing program, specifically focused on poetry. So I'm happy to be here today and hopefully answer any questions you may have about the process.
Congratulations. I'm Robin Dunbar. I received my PhD from ODU last May in public administration and policy. And it was a journey that I absolutely loved. And I had a great experience at Old Dominion University. I received my bachelor's, master's, and PhD there. So I'm a big Blue fan. And I look forward to sharing with you my experience and what got me over the finish line. And if you see me, by the way, we're moving over to read something, it's because I took this particular topic seriously through my dissertation of time management, and I wanted to make sure that I wrote down all my notes to share with you. So if you see me looking to the side, I just wanted to let you know what that was all about.
Great. Thank you again, panelists, for joining us. So my first question, as Robin kind of alluded to, is about timeline. And so how do you set a realistic timeline to complete the home stretch? And I'm going to let Sam kick us off because she just most recently got through the home stretch and the finish line.
Hi again. So this is definitely a tricky thing, I think, for many people to deal with. And I'm sure my panelists could agree with me on this. But I'm one of those people who likes to plan ahead. I use a planner, I use my notes app in my phone. I think, as much as you can, starting with those organizational skills and those organizational things you have as early as you can in the process is the best way to navigate something like this. For me, I wanted to get my thesis done as soon as possible. And I think that that helps you in that final step of actually completing the defense with your committee. So yeah, just setting realistic goals for yourself, of course, but also just being able to schedule your defense as early as possible is also important. And I can't emphasize that enough because I know so many of my peers in my cohort I did my defense in February. It was February 5th of my final semester. So many people in my cohort were like, how did you do that? How did you get that done so early? But it was really just starting thinking about the thesis as early as I could and just gradually working on it throughout my time here at ODU. So I think early, that's the best word I can say for today. So.
Thanks, Sam. Robin?
Yep. Well, the first thing I did was I attended as many of these career pathway presentations as I could. And career pathways, share that with others, especially your peers, because they have an amazing library of videos. So I started there watching as many videos as possible. Sam is right about pre-preparing. And then I headed over to YouTube. And what that did is that provided me a more global perspective of time management to get across the finish line for PhDs from other universities. And so I learned all sorts of different ways people tackle this for time management. But then you also start to hear common themes, lessons learned. What worked for one person might not have worked for another. And so I needed, this is new territory of how to finish this. And I realized pretty quick that I wasn't in total control of when I got my PhD and crossed the finish line. It is teamwork with the university. So after I did that, I went to make sure that I had great communication set up with my committee and that we were all on one page and I got clarity. And from there, I went to making sure I knew all Old Dominion University submission dates. So really important to make sure that even though you would like to cross the finish line at a certain time, there are certain times that the university has for submission dates for the dissertation. And when you can graduate. So it's all a puzzle that you're putting together. And very quickly, when I met with my committee, even though I had my own vision of when I wanted to cross the line, they had lessons learned and recommendations to work with me on perhaps considering going another semester or another year. So you have to be open to that. And I also have friends that felt like they were doing something wrong because they weren't going the same pace I was. And it's really, I recommend that don't look at what I did and as fast as I got through as the only way to do it. So if you need to take more time, your PhD allows for more than a year and a half. And if you need that and that works best for you, or you're working or you have a family, don't put a lot of guilt and pressure on yourself. So you need to develop your timeline for your lifestyle and not feel guilty and anxious and burdened that you're not going as fast as others. And then the only other thing I would say, continually save every single thing often in many different ways, and download the guideline book for your dissertation so that at the very beginning, while you're creating your timeline and all your thesis and so forth, you know the formatting. So you don't want to have to redo that. And lastly, I met with the librarians to help me with that process. So from the beginning, you know your formatting, you know your guidelines, you're keeping good communication, and you know dates.
All right, Gulsha.
So we can come from different angles to this. And as my fellow panelists mentioned, there is a student portion, there's a advisor portion, there's also school deadlines. We can even talk about college deadlines as well as departmental deadlines. So depending on where you are at, we can talk about different things. But in general, I totally agree. Knowing about the deadlines would set you up what you are looking at and what is the pace you want to look at. I like to do that with my advisees, with my dissertees at the beginning of the year, saying that, okay, you need to defend by this week, which means that 2 weeks prior to that, we need to send your final document to your committee. So let's start from there. Like, what is the date, final date that I can offer feedback to you and your final draft? So that is the final portion, but we also talk about the proposal portion, of course. So in the same manner, like, you need to propose by the end of the specific semester to be able to defend in the specific semester. But I think what is really critical, and I see me myself is international with an international background, and I see some international names perhaps in our audience. So depending on your program, depending on your visa, depending on your assistantship status, you may have certain deadlines that you might not be able to say, okay, I have 8 years to go with the PhD program, so you need to finish at a specific time. So knowing some of those details is important. To me, it really goes hand to hand with the timeline, how to manage your time, how you communicate with your advisor becomes very critical. Because in our PhD program, we have 3 years. The last year is dedicated to the dissertation process. So I need to be very smart on my feet with my dissertees to manage time if they need to finish on time. It's bidirectional. I don't see it solely students' responsibility. This might not be a popular opinion. So we work together, like my fellow panelists also mentioned, like it is a collaborative effort that we plan together. And over the years, what I learned is working with deadlines is the best way to work. I bring those deadlines onto my dissertees, but I believe if a dissertee was coming to me with that plan, I would really like that. What I usually do is we determine, like I mentioned earlier, you are going to be proposing during this week. Let's go ahead and talk to your committee if they are available. So we set the date and then we basically plan backwards. Different times, different dates, and I put dedicated times on my planner. By that date, I will get a draft of first chapter, second chapter, all 3 chapters, 4th chapter, whatever. So we basically plan. Then me and my dissertee know what we are looking at. Again, not for everybody, and it is a structured plan that helps us manage time. And of course, it does not always go to the plan, and there's always room for revisions. From a faculty standpoint, I don't like my dissertee to cool down. They will send me the document and they will wait for a month to hear from me. So that doesn't work, and they will not be done. I actually usually offer feedback to their draft almost within 24 to 48 hours. So they keep going and it keeps them going. And it has been successful 90% of the time, as I can say. But again, it is a stylistic procedure. Not everybody might agree with it, or not everybody would work well within it. It can also create lots of overwhelm and stress. But again, like I think that piece is, long story short, it is not just on you. I think finding the right advisor who is going to work with you within your comfort level and how you want to achieve your goals and within the deadlines is the most critical piece as you are managing your time.
So I do want to build off of that because I think it's really important to work with your advisor and your committee to understand what the expectations are. I tend to tell my students that they need to give their committee and their advisor 2 weeks to return feedback and comments. So if you send something to me, you need to kind of block off 2 weeks that you're going to be working either on the formatting, on your graphics, tables, and other pieces of the dissertation that you still need to continue to work on, and uh, kind of allowing for your committee that time. So I asked them to build in those 2 weeks into their timeline. So it's important to kind of have the conversation with your committee and your advisor in terms of what the expectations are. Because you can't get frustrated when you've turned something in and it's only been a week, but the general expectation is that you need to give your committee 2 weeks. The other thing is you also, from a faculty perspective, I also tell my students to also respect that some periods of that semester are just going to be really crazy. So it's really hard for me to say I'm going to be responsive to you when I'm knee deep in grading and trying to get final grades in at the end of the semester. And so those are things that you need to think about and be realistic about the expectations for that timeline. It's not just what the work that you put into it, because it is a collaborative effort. And because I think all of your advisors are well intentioned and we want to give you feedback that makes this research, makes your thesis or dissertation so much better. But we need the time to do that in the same way that you need the time to do that research and do your due diligence. So it is that collaborative effort, but you can't collaborate well if you don't understand what the expectations are. So the expectations have to feature into the realistic timeline. I also think that it's important to know what your goal, what that finish line timeline looks like, and then work backwards. Because it's better to set a pace, a good, consistent pace, rather than like she said, Gulsha said, this up and down, really, really hot, working, and then a cool down period. Really hot, working, because it doesn't, that maintaining that consistent work process, I think, is what actually helps you get to the finish line without burnout. I feel like just the same way that we talk about the yo-yo dieting and you gain all that weight back after you yo-yo diet, it's the same thing. You know, that consistent weight loss and the consistent working on the dissertation is what gets you successfully to that end goal. So that timeline needs to be realistic. Go ahead, Gusa.
And I totally agree. As you were talking, I also thought about some of the other details. Again, there are discipline-specific differences around this, but what type of methodology you are using? I think, Robin, you were talking about this piece. Some dissertations take a lot longer than some other dissertations. Like, you know, I do mixed methods designs in most part. Those really take so much time, and there are lots of different data points that you do analysis and meet with your participants. So like knowing some of those pieces in advance and planning accordingly might also really help too.
And that's why I think that timeline also needs something that is collaborative with your committee and your advisor, because sometimes you might not realize that, for example, with a lot of research that requires human subjects research, a lot of the advisors that I know require that you get that review done ahead of your prospectus defense, because they don't want you to defend a prospectus and then have to change your methodology because the institutional research board, review board at the university said X, Y, and Z. So they would much rather you have that done up front. But that's not something that necessarily students recognize as part of that process. And so when things have to happen relative to other parts of the process is also something that you need to be discussing with your committee and with your advisors. So since we're kind of on the topic of time, I'm going to go to Robin first to talk about strategies. So what are some strategies that you use for time management?
Yep, I use time block techniques. I happen to be a calendar keeper of the hard way, you know, a hard book and it's a teaching calendar. And the teaching calendar that has 15-minute increments. And so I block off very specific time on that calendar, and it goes everywhere with me. So I have that. And I also use, I didn't know there was an official name for this, but I looked it up. It's called the Pomodoro technique. And that is when you work for about 25 minutes and then you take a 5-minute break. And I do that because I find that when I'm writing or I'm in deep thought, I've gone down the rabbit hole, or I'm in the flow, that if I step away, I have a different perspective when I come back. So if I just kept going the whole time, sometimes when I come back 24 hours after that, I'm like, what was I thinking? And I find that I do better material with that Pomodoro technique. I also learned to say no to some commitments when people were asking me throughout this getting over the finish line. You know, I made sure from the get-go, before I even started my PhD, that I had a conversation with my family. And I said, this is temporary. I'm apologizing now. There's going to be many times that I'm not going to be able to say yes, like I used to certain things while I get through this. So that really helped me because I didn't have that extra stress on me when somebody did ask me to do something. Everybody knew up front before I even started my PhD that that might be a possibility. And they were more supportive because of that. I minimize as much as I can distractions, and I try not to multitask, but we all know if we're working full time, it's something that we do. We're trying to do our normal full-time job, or part-time if you're lucky going through your PhD part-time. But most of us are full-time at the same time doing the PhD. So I was doing a lot of my PhD at night and on the weekends. It was really important to make sure I blocked those times off and I committed, and that was a commitment to myself that I was going to be disciplined. And then I think practicing self-care as much as you can, whatever that means. For me, I have an environmental background, so it's really important for me during my breaks to get outside, breathe fresh air, go touch a tree, walk across my yard. Even there was times where it was just really healthy for me just to go get the mail out of my mailbox and be barefoot walking across the grass. You know, I needed to like reground myself out in nature and step away from the computer. So those were some of my time management strategies.
Sam?
I feel like I'm just going to echo everything that Robin was saying, but yes, self-care is so important because I mean, I think all of us know or should be reminded that you can't do this kind of work if you're not functioning, if your mental health is not well. Like you can't even think straight. So for me, that means yoga breaks, like sometimes multiple times a day, just even 5 minutes of closing my eyes and breathing was really helpful throughout this process. But that's for me. I know that that's not what everybody needs. So just kind of learning. I think you kind of learn a little bit more about yourself as you go through this process and what those things are for you. Sometimes, you know, just going to the kitchen and getting a drink of like a glass of water is enough to kind of reset and look away from the computer, or going outside. That's another great one. But also sleep. I know that a lot of my peers will say, I didn't sleep at all last night because I was thinking about this. So I think finding those times during the day to have those breaks and to have those mental spaces away from the computer will help you get sleep at night as well, which is very important. But going back to kind of time management specifically, I talked a little bit about like gradually working on things throughout the process, and more specifically, those gradual things are going to be those more time consuming parts of your dissertation or thesis. And then I would say if you have anything that you know is an easier task, like a quicker thing, just do that and get it out of the way so that you can check that off your list. And scheduling reminders on your phone, that was a way that I could block out time for each of those tasks. So I'm another supporter of scheduling your day as if you're scheduling an event. You know, you have the hour block or the 2 hour block, and then the break block as well. So those things are really important.
All right, Gulsha, what about you?
I agree with everything said. I think self-care piece is very important because that's what keeps you going. Like you cannot offer from an empty jug. So like how you fill yourself in with rest and with good self-care will definitely determine this process, which is not a sprint, it is a marathon that we are talking about. So one thing I usually like to chat with my students is like when we think about dissertation, this is big study, big procedure, depending on where you are at in your researcher identity development, how many research you have been involved. And also, even if you have done research before, I always found it very different to write a thesis or a dissertation than reporting in a manuscript, which is a very succinct and short thing to present. But dissertation basically tells us that how much you were intentional with what you did. You explain lots of small details, what you did and why you did when compared to a manuscript. So thinking about that, if you have this mindset, and many of us have this, oh, I'm going to work on Fridays all day to write my dissertation. That might not work because Friday is the end of the week. We usually do not like to work. And also a whole day, like really you are going to be writing dissertation for the whole day. And there's Amazon to shop, there's social media to look at. So over the years, what I discussed with my students, and I know that also works for me too, having smaller chunks of time every day. And if you find yourself struggling, putting more than a couple of sentences within half an hour, walk away from it. Maybe you are not ready to write that day. Then you come back, like Robin said, if you have a fresh mindset and it flows, beautiful. Did you schedule 2 hours that day? You wrote 2 hours, it was beautiful. It keeps going, keep going if you have the time. But if not, like you're like, I'm done, just walk away because next morning or next afternoon, you will still have time to come back to it and it is still fresh. So like I said earlier, I don't like my students to get cold with it. I wouldn't recommend getting cold with it. So even if you are putting a paragraph into it every day, that will accumulate and that will build up. So like that continuing process is a good thing to think about. And I agree with Sam that like, you know, if some portions of what you are doing is easier to you, you like structuring, yeah, structure the headings and everything, the document, like go ahead and do that first, because there's a certain degree of gratification in that you accomplished something about it and you're ready for the rest of the stuff. And like also recognizing some portions you are dragging your feet. Maybe those are the pieces like I'm going to give it like half an hour today. I'm going to give it 15 minutes so that you can create that continuation again with that process.
So I'm going to wrap up this particular question, maybe shifting us a little bit away from working on the dissertation and the thesis, because we also have that time frame for some students where you're done with coursework and now you have to take your comp exams. And I'm just going to share from my experience. I took my comp exams the first time I failed, and then I was dragging my feet taking the second one until I realized that and so my husband and I had to sit down. I was like, okay, what is it that's holding you back? And I hadn't set aside dedicated time to study and prep. And because I didn't have classes, all my evenings were free. We would go to dinner, we would go do things and clean the house. And I realized that, okay, I need to pick one day, like I would normally have class, and that will be I'm going to the library. I'm not going to be home, so I can't be distracted by other stuff. But this, like, just like I had to go to class, I had to go to the library for a 2.5 hour block to study for my comp exams, rather than dragging my feet. And so I had to revert back to this very rigid schedule of, okay, I'm used to going to class, and I know that I get things done accomplished in this block. And so I had to go back to that rigid 2 hour, 2.5 hour block. I'm at the library. Nobody knows that I'm here. It's just me. I'm just gonna study and be done. And so sometimes borrowing from that structure of classes can also be helpful during kind of that transition. So it is recognizing that, for different parts of the PhD or master's process, you might need different strategies. But related to this issue of time management and strategies is also the question of accountability. When you're in class, the teacher says, here are the deadlines, and you turn things in and you get graded and you're done. There's an accountability process that concludes at the end of that semester. Studying for comps, I didn't have that accountability. Again, with the dissertation, um, I had a really good relationship with my dissertation chair. And so it was very kind of casual and informal. And he never really kind of asked me to formally report on what I was working on towards my dissertation. So I actually took a long time to work on my dissertation because I didn't have necessarily that accountability structure in place. And so, how do you develop accountability for completion during this home stretch when you don't necessarily? Some people might have really good advisors who are like, okay, where are you? How are you doing? What's the next step? And others might have faculty advisors who are more with go with the flow and letting you kind of set the pace. So how do you develop that accountability in that environment? And Gulsha, we'll go with you first.
I think I partially answered this question earlier. Like, I'm from the faculty standpoint, again, I am more hands-on, but I also work with my advisee. So I don't walk in front of them. I don't walk behind of them. I walk with them. So we create this system, what works for them, and they definitely stay accountable, because if they don't stay accountable, I cannot write the dissertation for them, no matter how much deadlines I set up for them, it is not going to work. So figuring those pieces out is also an important part, like what works for you, what doesn't work for you, and like what will keep you actually writing, what wouldn't keep you, and how much you are. And I mean, we might also want to actually address this piece. There are cultural differences around this too. Like each of us come from different backgrounds where we may want to be led or we may want to be followed, or we like figuring those pieces out with your advisor and your committee members is very important. And sometimes it is so easy to get to a point of self-defeating, saying, that I should have known about this already, and I don't need to ask a question, but I'm going to put it off. I'm going to avoid. I'm going to wait till the right moment to ask, or I'm going to wait till the right moment I feel good enough to actually go for it. To me, in a limited timeline we are looking at, that may not be the best way to go. Accountability is not only continuing to do what you need to do, is also related to being able to ask when you need help, being able to actually pursue the help you need from whom. It may not be even your advisor. It might be a peer, or it might be another faculty member. It might be a committee member. So like figuring out what you need and being able to ask for what you need is also part of your accountability, rather than expecting the right time to come or it's given to you. So like sometimes so much time could be lost with feeling like, oh, I'm not good enough for this, or I should have known about this. I will be embarrassed to ask about this. To me, there's no dumb questions to ask about, because there are so many moving pieces of the process we are looking at, and you may have actually missed the critical information that is shared with you in a moment that you were not present. So yeah, I will stop there.
That's a really important reminder, actually, because I think we often think about accountability in a different way. Sam, and then Robin.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring up communication because that I think is the most important thing in that relationship with your thesis chair or your advisor. And just making sure that you're checking in, making sure that you're choosing the right person, that you feel comfortable approaching to check in periodically, but also thinking about this process as if it were an independent study with this person. For me, that helped me set my own deadlines, but also work with my advisor to set deadlines for myself. Um, and I also want to echo what we said about having like a designated workspace. I think that also helps you be accountable and getting your work done. If you have a space that is comfortable and where you would want to work. Yeah.
Right. For me, communication is really key for me being accountable. So when you are working with your advisors, clarity is key because once you go away from that meeting, if you're still fuzzy, you've now wasted time because you're going to be guessing. And throughout the process, you're going to have periods maybe of that imposter syndrome. So you're going to be going, am I smart enough? Am I bright enough? Can I really get a PhD and call myself an expert in this particular area? And so that starts to get you and feed into your mind at times. And so making sure that when you are meeting with your advisors and committee, maybe you repeat back what they wanted or say, can you tell me that a different way? Or is this exactly where I'm headed? Because this you are taking a journey of the unknown. There's going to be things that pop up that were actually never said and you never heard till the very end. I remember when I was developing my timeline, one thing I never considered is I think it's the chair or the dean needed to review the dissertation at some point. And there was, what's his schedule or her schedule? Are they going to be on vacation all summer? Is my dissertation going to be sitting on their desk? And so now I have to wait till fall. So there's going to be things that are you're not going to find out till the end that you just never heard. And so you need to stay open and flexible with that. Again, regular check-ins are really good, and some productivity tools can be good. I didn't use them, but I have friends that did. They use Trello, Asana, simple calendars and reminders. I'm a big person for rewarding yourself along the way. Everybody has different rewards that they give themselves, but when I completed a milestone, there would be something, I would be able for once to maybe go take a walk in a park or go down to the beach where I was staying really close to my computer before. I would reward myself with something to provide some extra motivation. And then I would stay super flexible. So you need to know that even though you've created a timeline and you're accountable and the flow is going, you need to be flexible and embrace change throughout the process, because there will be it tests you. Your PhD can test you, and at times you're going to feel like nobody understands what I'm going through but me. It can feel very, very much your own personal journey. So although we're saying work with a group and your support group, you're going to feel like only you knows really what you're going through and what is ahead of you. So stay flexible, embrace change, and it's all, you're going to learn so much. It's so much more than your dissertation. You're going to leave your dissertation with skills by just going through the process that you never knew that was a skill that you were building upon throughout the process.
So, Robin, then I transition to another question. Can you hear me? Good. Um, and the question is, how do you manage the isolation that can occur during the dissertation process? And I feel like I had that isolation. I experienced that isolation much more extremely than most people. I feel like because I was also pregnant when I was working on my dissertation, and I was on bed rest. So for 3 months, I was on bed rest while working on my dissertation. So I really wasn't engaging with a lot of people, and so it did really feel like you were in it alone and by yourself. So, um, Robin, since you kind of brought some of that up, if you wanted to kind of speak to managing that isolation.
Yeah, so again, I ended up embracing it because now that you won't maybe appreciate it till after you've received your PhD, and then you're into the next step of your life. Like right now, for the last year, I've been applying for academic positions at different universities. And again, you go from one thing to the next right after your PhD, and it's a journey. And I'm trying to enjoy it and not panic and not be anxious and embrace it. And a lot of the skills and the things that I put in place through getting across the finish line for my PhD, I continually apply. I'm continually applying it to small projects, to how I approach getting a position, a professor position, to how I'm actually right now I've got my house up for sale, and I'm still using these time management skills continually. I'm still doing things where I'm by myself and I'm having to give presentations, and oh my goodness, I've had to repeat what I did for my dissertation during all my job interviews. And they've asked me, how did you time manage your dissertation? They actually ask you those kind of questions. And so it's very much with the isolation piece about you and your journey. But I would say try to look at it as a wonderful process, a lifelong learner process, and growing along the way.
Sam?
So for me, what I can add to that is, I mean, I definitely agree with everything Robin was saying. But this kind of goes back to communication. I think if you're communicating, you don't feel as isolated during the process. And especially when you're communicating with your peers who are also going through the same thing, is really important. And also just remind yourself that this is not permanent. Like this is going to have, you have deadlines, you know that this process isn't going to be forever, you know that your life isn't going to be as crazy as this forever. So just kind of taking that for what it is and just enjoying the fact that you have the time and space to be doing the thing that you love doing. I think that's also really important, is just recognizing that we're lucky to be here, and just reminding yourself that this process can't be rushed and shouldn't be rushed, and soaking that up while you're here.
All right, Lucia, what do you have to add? The
I
isolation
think,
part, I think, is particularly challenging.
yes, definitely. I think you touched on everything, and again, it might differ from one person to the other person and their circumstances. If you are full-time with assistantships, if you are your program in a cohort model, or like more part-time students who follow their own process. We observe this more in the last year of the program, where our students are writing their dissertations, but in the first 2 years, they go through classes together, and majority of the time they are together, since we have a cohort model. And I always tell them, your cohort is your village, and like, that's where you get your energy from, support from. If you missed something, they are going to know. You will fill in each other's gaps, and perhaps support each other with your strengths to stretch each other towards growth. So like, cohort is a big part, but when it comes to family can suffer because like it is an involved process. But I agree with Sam, it is not for the rest of your lives. This is a limited time. And actually this week earlier, one of my dissertees defended her dissertation and her partner was there. And after we congratulated her, I turned to the partner and I said, congratulations, you got an honorary PhD degree as well now. Because like it is very difficult to do it without our family, and like they hold the space and they create a certain degree of safety. And however you define your family, it might be your friends, and like it doesn't need to be extended family. So like paying those attentions and keeping yourself connected socially is very important because it can get really lonely and draining.
I definitely agree that this is an opportunity to lead to people who you might not normally lead to. I'll tell you, when I was first done with coursework, my husband was like the happiest person on earth. He's like, I actually finally have you again for evenings and you don't have classes. So again, that honestly was something that then followed me as I continued to work on my dissertation, where I felt guilt when I was trying to do work at night because now I was done with coursework and he expected me to, hang out with him, watch movies, and so again, we actually had to negotiate where I would say, okay, Tuesday night is my work night. You can go do things with your buddies on Tuesday nights. But it was, that some of these are guilt that sometimes you self-impose because when I talked to him, I said, oh, that's perfectly fine. But here I was feeling really guilty that he wanted to spend all this time with me and I still had school stuff to do. So I think that is a challenge that, but you learn to lean into people who you wouldn't normally lean into. My next door neighbor was somebody who I basically uh, beginning of the week, I started talking to her and we're like, oh, okay, well, this is my goal for the week. And then at the end of the week, she would ask me, do you achieve those goals? And I would, have some concrete goals. And I would unabashedly sometimes have to say that I did not meet those goals. But those, I'd never really had interactions with my neighbor until she and I were talking about, I was doing my dissertation research and I was all stressed out. And, so I think just you surprise yourself in how the people that you can begin to lean into to overcome some of that isolation. Because I was a little bit behind my cohort, so most of my been done with their dissertations and off doing their own thing, and so there weren't a lot of people who wanted to check up on me and be part of my network. So I think we've talked a little bit about balancing also the dissertation research with work, family, and other stuff. But I did want to open if there was other advice or insights that you wanted to offer to our audience before we take questions from the floor. Well, I will, before I take questions, I will say that I think for the students who are here and participating in the workshop and who might be viewing this workshop later, the fact that you're here, I think is a really important first step in making sure that you're working towards the light at the end of the tunnel. So.
Understanding, I think, Robin, a little bit of your motivation when we were in classes together. I mean, you were on the grind all the way through, as you also shared again today. I, on the other hand, was motivated, hit a wall, distracted by other life, became demotivated, and am now re-engaging in terms of finding that motivation again, that strength and power we had during the coursework. And for the entire panel, but maybe Robin first, do you have any thoughts you may, share on how you might approach regaining that motivation, finding the passion again for what drove us to begin in the first place to kind of help me get back on track?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, you have a brilliant research idea, right? You had brilliant research that you were on track to do. And I'm here to tell you that finish it. It's about, when I talked to other of our peers in the cohort, it was about showing that you understand the process of research more than anything. That's what our professors want to see, if we know the process. And you do now. You know it. It's just a matter of just pushing through and completing it. And I'd be glad to help mentor you. So that's the other thing. Mentors are great. So I hope this is okay to just divulge, but Dr. Youssef has been my instructor, my advisor, my chair, my friend. So, I mean, the whole gamut. But we signed a mentoring agreement. And the mentoring agreements are fantastic. And so it's a little bit different than the commitments you make with your dissertation, but they complement each other. And I know you can do it. And Dr. Youssef, maybe you would want to chime in a little bit about the mentorship that can help you also get through and across the line. But I'm here for you, Bob. I didn't know you paused. We can just pretend you didn't pause.
That's right. That's
There's
what we're trying to do, is pick back up where we left off.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with pausing, by the way. Don't view it as bad. Just move on.
I think that's where potentially we are our worst critic, right? So the ones that are saying, well, I paused, so now it's like bad, and now I have to get going. It's like, oh, I took a short break so that I can be re-energized, and now I'm good to go. So sometimes it is also kind of just that the frame that we put around it. And I think this is part of the having a realistic timeline and also having real expectations. So would you have to add to that about re-energizing and remotivating after you've gone cold?
Did you call me? Your microphone comes and goes, so
Oh,
like
no.
occasionally I don't hear you. That's the reason why. I mean, again, like, you know, it is very much like your dissertation idea, and like there's validity and value in it. And I always tell my students, you are the expert of the topic you are studying, no matter what. My specialty area is clinical supervision. A good chunk of my students who work with me on their dissertations also study some form of supervision. But I always tell them, knowing supervision is not making me an expert on every single topic. And I follow your lead and I support your lead. And not forgetting that piece is important. And also, like, kind of in the same line with the questions in the chat box, sometimes it is so easy to attribute way more meaning to the dissertation process than it may require. Like Robin said, it is a process of showing that you learned about how to develop research, how to conduct research, how to be ethically responsible, and how to discuss some findings or data analysis procedures, learn about those pieces. There's a reason why it is an unpublished product, although it is very valuable if it is designed in a published manner. So like thinking about this as a learning process and giving yourself the space to perhaps fail when you need to fail so that you can develop that learning might be necessary, along with all the other things we talked about today. So I think that might, like, looking at it from a different angle than what you may have been perceiving it as, might be something to reinvigorate your passion with it.
All right, so there was a question about selecting your dissertation committee and approaching them ahead of time. So any thoughts on answering the question that Daniel put in the chat? Sam, go ahead.
For me, I was lucky. It was easy enough just sending an email to, you know, my first picks and just even if that isn't something you want to do, like approaching them in person and asking. I think most professors in this situation are prepared to be asked that question at one point. So I think, yeah, just being open and talking about what you're interested in looking at. But honestly, it goes back to those relationships that you have probably already formed while you're here at ODU, and thinking about who you feel comfortable being your chair, being in your committee, uh, and who you want to be the people that look at your work and learn from during this process. But yeah, not being afraid to reach out and just ask.
Go ahead, Gulsha.
I also encourage, kind of in the same line with Sam is talking about, definitely trying to get to know your committee members before you ask them. Because very frequently I observe doc students at the beginning when we interview them, they name certain faculty. And I know those certain faculty, some of them do not work with doc students. Some of them are not responsive in a manner that student might need. So getting to know how they work, because like all these questions we have been discussing, getting to know who you work with and how they work with is an important part of the process. What you need from these faculty, whether they are going to be your chair or your committee members. I remember during my doc program, I selected my department chair, my dissertation chair, particularly because I had a good relationship with her. And also she was very structured and organized, and I did not have that type of structure and organize in my skill set. And I learned throughout that process. And then I selected another faculty member who was so laid back, even more laid back than me. And I was like, they are going to balance each other out well for me. I'm going to actually swing in between and learn from this process. And it did work out really well for me. And the other pieces with your committee members, how are you going to utilize these committee members? I think Sam also mentioned that. How are they going to contribute to what you are doing? Are they specialized in a specific methodology? Are they specialized in a specific topic? Or they are wonderful feedback givers? They are none, but they are really good at looking deeper into the project or keep you going, keep motivating you. So like assessing who you are, what you need, as well as assessing who is going to be your chair and who is going to be your committee members will make the process a lot more efficient and helpful for you. And being really intentional with who you are selecting goes a long way in my experience.
And if I could add to that, I actually had one of my committee members for my dissertation whose job was to be the yes man. And his role was to basically say, yes, you can do it. Yes, you're on track. Yes, you've got this. He didn't necessarily have specific expertise in that area, in my policy area of study. But he, like Bob said, you need that motivation. Sometimes he was the, yes, you got this person on my committee, even when sometimes I would get back drafts of my chapters, like with a ton of red and a ton of comments that you had to respond. And he'd be like, yes, you got this. So I think that's another thinking about the specific roles that you want your committee members to. Robert, before I get to you, I also want to suggest that the other thing is talk to students in your program and get feedback from them. What works for them in terms of the committee members that they have. And if you learn that one committee member is really good about turning around feedback within a week, and that's what you need, then that should also be part of the consideration. But otherwise, you might hear, well, this person is really good about responding immediately, and that's something that you need, or somebody who is a great cheerleader if that's what you need. So talking to students in your program, I think, can provide a lot of good, important insights. All right, well, we are at time, and so I do want to thank our panelists for all that advice and insights and strategies for succeeding in the home stretch, and I thank our audience for participating and for your questions. And I hope everybody has a great Friday.